Kamari will bring you one, and I need to give you some updates on this because some of the information is wrong. Questions for the DA candidate?
Hold on just a second. Can you all hear back there? No. You want to put, Mary Beth, just come to
The questions for the DA candidates will start at 5:40, but they'll end at 6:15. The questions from the public, and please write down your questions on index cards provided. If you need an index card, raise your hand and someone will bring it to you. And you can also turn in your questions or get index cards at the SAM table, which is over here. And that will happen from 6:15 to 6:45. And at 6:45, we're going to end the program because we need to be out of the building at 7. 7? No, we don't. 7:30, I'm sorry.
Why is it being cut short?
Why is it cut short?
Yeah, why is it being cut short at the last minute?
hold the questions, please. We need to get our program moving.
So
Not cut short.
it's not, yeah, it was just a mistake on the agenda. Someone who put up the agenda made a mistake, so. Okay, we're all quieted down, that's great. I wanted to point out that there are several tables around the room. One for Sonoma Alliance for Medical Marijuana over there, Kamari's standing there. And the next one over is ASA, Americans for Safe Access. And going around the room, there are refreshments if you need them. And they were provided by Organican. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And then in the back, we have Victoria Shanahan's table and Jill Ravich's table with their information, and you can go up and talk to them afterwards. And one of the reasons that we're ending the program when we are is so that there'll be more time to talk with the candidates after the program's over. So, and we'd like you to turn off your cell phones, please, at this time. So, and thank you to all the people that are putting on the sound and videotaping this. This is very important for the future. And I have to say that when I was passing out the flyers for this event, the first thing anybody noticed was, oh, Ernie Carpenter's going to be there. So we're very pleased to have him as our moderator tonight. And he was, if you don't know, our county supervisor for West County for 16 years. So with that, I'm going to say, here's Ernie.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sitting off to the side, as you can see, because the focus tonight is upon the two candidates for district attorney, whom I will introduce in just a moment after a couple of items of business, and then I hope to stay off to the side. I want to keep the program moving. We have several questions that are pre-prepared and have been given to the candidates, just so you know. The sponsors, again, are SAM, which has been in Sonoma County since 1995. That's the Alliance for Medical Marijuana. They sponsor the debate every year since 2012. ASA, American for Safe Access, has been here for 12 years, and newly formed Citizens for Responsible Access, which is a PAC centered around medical marijuana. I would like to thank Organican for providing refreshments and sponsoring, as well as Peace and Medicine and CRA for providing the printing and other information and expenses for this debate. Right before we go to audience questions, I will introduce the people you can give those questions to. The reason we are here, again, and I'll just say this, it's odd to me that the bar and the women lawyers and medical marijuana persons would be those who sponsor district attorney debates, but I'm sure there's some connection there that I'll let you make in your own minds. Each candidate will have 4 minutes. We did numbers, and Ms. Ravich got the number. Would you prefer to go first or second?
Does this go the whole way through?
Just to start out, we're going to alternate.
For final remarks?
For the
I'd like to have the final word if I can choose and have a line.
See, I have to run that through my head, how that ends up when we go through all of those questions. So, Ms. Shanahan, I'm going to let you start with the 4-minute introductions. You get to introduce yourself. So, ladies and gentlemen, Victoria Shanahan, who is a Deputy District Attorney, and she will have 4 minutes. The timekeeper is, where's the timekeeper? Right here on the end, and she will cue you.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks everyone for coming. My name is Victoria Shanahan, as you know, and I'm a Deputy District Attorney, and I support the decriminalization, regulation, and taxation of marijuana. A little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Mendocino County, where marijuana is part of the culture up there. My experiences with marijuana were many, as far as people I knew whose parents indulged in it, as well as my own mother. When my father became ill with cancer, about 12 years ago or so, he was really suffering. I was actually waiting, it was about 15 years ago, I was waiting for my bar results. And he was suffering and starving, basically, because he couldn't keep food down and he wasn't hungry. And we tried everything and nothing was working. My father was very anti-assistance and didn't like to take help, so my mother suggested that she give him some marijuana that was in some butter and put it on his toast and give it to him. And that had a remarkable effect on him. He was able to keep his food down and eat, and after he recovered from this period of not doing well while suffering from cancer and chemotherapy, we told him what had occurred, and he was a little irritated with us, to say the least. He was anti-marijuana. However, he ended up going to the Veterans Administration and getting a prescription for Marinol, which for him, that worked. And we had him for an additional year after that, and it was a good, comfortable year. So I understand the benefits of medical marijuana. I've seen them firsthand. I think the DA's office can take a leadership role in this area. Mendocino County, where I came from and practiced for my first 5.5 years as Deputy DA, we did just that. I think the DA should take a leadership role. The buck stops with us. We can set a policy. We can be forward-thinking. We can address the issues and be progressive about it. I'd rather be a proactive DA than a reactive DA. We've been needing a policy on marijuana for 3.5 years and we have not received one. I would be that DA that would implement a policy on marijuana. Thank you.
I'll try to go with the clapping a little bit, but if you can hold it down, it'll help our time. And now the District Attorney of Sonoma County, Jill Ravich.
Good evening. My name is Jill Ravich, in case you don't know, and I am the DA here right now. We don't know what the future holds. That will be dependent upon you and other voters here in Sonoma County. But it's an honor to serve as your District Attorney. I was here about 4 years ago, and many of you may have been in the room when I addressed you. I cannot remember now if I was here 8 years ago, but maybe I was. I'm absolutely not sure. In any event, whenever I've spoken to any of you, and I've spoken with many of you, I've been very clear that I support safe access to medical cannabis. And that is something that I feel very strongly about. I don't have a personal experience such as has been shared with you, but I've spoken with patients and I've spoken with advocates, and I understand that medical marijuana really does serve a purpose. It's amazing to see what is now being extracted from marijuana and used to assist people. I mean, we probably all watched these shows about these kids that are being moved to Colorado so they can get the proper extract to help them with these incredible seizures that they're suffering. It's remarkable. That being said, I am sworn to enforce the laws of the state of California, and that's what I try to do. Do I succeed every time? No. Do I try to do better when I don't succeed? Absolutely. And one of the ways I try to improve the way I enforce the laws in California is to meet with you. I've met with a number of you in this room on regular occasions, and I've talked with you about what we can do better so that patients are not, improperly charged with crimes. I have made the prosecution of marijuana a low-level priority in my office, and if you talk to the prosecutors who've been assigned to that unit, they will reaffirm that I have said that. And when advocates have come to me with cases that they're concerned about, I've been very clear. If they can identify which cases they're concerned about, we'll talk through it. And if indeed we have brought charges against legitimate patients, then we'll dismiss the cases. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that, unfortunately, we are an area now where there is intense trafficking of marijuana, and it's interstate trafficking that's occurring. And with it comes violence. I mean, we're looking at cases involving home invasion robberies, we're looking at cases involving homicides, but we can't lose sight of that. With regard to the legalization of marijuana, again, that's up to you, the voters. Whatever the voters decide, whatever the laws are on the books, I'm sworn to uphold them. I don't know whether my letter to Kamari was made available to you tonight in response to the questions that were submitted. If it isn't, I'm happy to provide it to you. But in essence, what I said in there was that I will adhere to the local ordinance, and I think that's something we're going to talk about a little bit further here. And we have been for some time now. With regard to a written protocol, I'm happy to talk about that. That's something that's on the table for discussion as well. And I've been meeting with groups, and this, okay, I thought it was this person, I'm sorry. Is 1 minute? Yeah. And I'm continuing to meet with people. So I'm looking forward to a robust conversation. And I hope at the end of it, you will understand where I stand, which is I do believe that patients should have safe access to medical cannabis, as should their care providers. And I think that if we work together, keep the lines of communication open, we can achieve that goal. Thank you.
So apparently, candidates, we have 2 timekeepers, so be on your toes.
Yeah.
These questions, this first question has to do with local guidelines. It has 2 parts, 3 minutes, so 45-second answers each of you to each part of this. And we'll start with Ms. Shanahan. In
3 minutes each, not 45 seconds.
What did I say?
You said 45 seconds, so you get the 3 minutes. 3 minutes.
45 seconds each person, each question adds up to 3 minutes. Local guidelines. In 2010, a unanimous decision by the Supreme Court of California in Kelly held that, did you want to do 3 minutes for each part? Oh, okay, well then there's really correction. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to answer each part. In 2010, a unanimous decision by the Supreme Court of California in Kelly held that persons with state-issued identification cards are immune for arrest for amounts of cannabis within the guidelines set forth in specified health and safety codes. Sonoma County guidelines are authorized by the same health and safety codes. Part A, will your administration recognize this immunity from prosecution for authorized patients in Sonoma County to possess and cultivate 3 pounds and 30 plants within 100 square feet? Ms. Shanahan.
Well, if my answer is only 45 seconds, yes.
You have 3 minutes now.
That was easy.
It's confusing here.
Okay.
They've
And to clarify, I'm timekeeping for Ms. Shanahan and Joni's timekeeping.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you have 3 minutes.
Yes, I would recognize those guidelines. I think they're clear and they've been accepted for a long period of time, and I would continue to do so.
Yeah, in 2007, the county passed an ordinance that set the guidelines at 30 plants within 100 square feet, or a canopy of 100 square feet, 30 plants, 3 pounds. And I know there was a lot of discussion about it a few years ago, and I've had discussions since with a number of advocates about how those guidelines came into place. Prior to that, we were 99 plants. I don't know if any of you remember that. And we came down to 30. And that was as a result of a lot of discussion, a lot of testimony by people like Dr. Herben Reeder and others. And ultimately, it was decided that that seemed to be the right amount. Now, with Kelly, of course, we have a decision that talks about whatever is necessary for a patient's needs. And there are those that do interpret that as setting aside the guidelines, but rather being whatever the treating physician believes is appropriate. The Board of Supervisors, as you may know, discussed repealing those guidelines, and there was a very well-attended hearing where they backed down from that effort in 2012, I think it was. And as a result, those guidelines are still in effect. The ordinance is still on the books. And I think it would be too confusing not to continue to go by that ordinance, although knowing there can be a variation for a patient whose needs might be different.
Thank you. Part B of that, is the state-issued medical marijuana card necessary to attain immunity from arrest and prosecution, or is a valid doctor's recommendation sufficient? Ms. Ravich.
The card is something that will provide an individual with immunity. As you know, the chiefs have a protocol that's in accord with that, and even the sheriff has a policy that's in accord with that. The part about the valid doctor's recommendation, it's actually an affirmative defense if you have a doctor's recommendation, and I know we're splitting hairs, and indeed my office will recognize a valid doctor's recommendation as a means of immunity from prosecution when presented. But the thing to remember is sometimes we don't get that information on the front end, and I know we're going to be talking about delays in court as we go forward, and I have spoken with advocates and some of you who may be patients about the fact that there's fear presenting some material to us for our consideration. And what I hope to do is to dispel the fear, because information is power. And if we are properly informed of an individual's status so that they do comport with what the ordinance permits and what the law provides, then we're going to be able to protect the rights of patients. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the MMP, as you know, through the Kelly decision, a part of it got overturned because it was unconstitutional, because it was amended without voter approval, and that the CUA, which was the Compassionate Use Act, was passed through Prop 215, and voters approved that. And so they overturned the quantity limits under the MMP, but they didn't change the safe harbor provisions found in the MMP, the medical marijuana program. Those safe harbor provisions are still good law, they're still applicable, and in this instance, when someone doesn't have an actual card under the MMP, the safe harbor provisions can still be applied to those individuals with a valid recommendation. I think as the district attorney's office in reviewing cases, as Mr. Ravich stated, a lot of this information isn't provided right out front when somebody is being prosecuted and we're unaware of these things. But I think that careful consideration and looking at the guidelines of Sonoma County, complying with the guidelines, if an individual is in compliance with those particular guidelines, we can ask that they provide that information before we even think about prosecuting them. So I think Kelly did not do away with the safe harbor provision, and an individual can be protected even if they don't have a marijuana card. They can still be protected under the safe harbor provision of the MMP.
Very good. We'll move on to collectives and cooperatives. Each candidate will have 3 minutes. On each part of this, there are 3 parts. Question A, what expectations would you have for cooperatives or collectives in Sonoma County to be compliant with state law and local law? And I'll amend that to say what expectations or advice would you have for collectives or cooperatives? And we'll start with Ms. Shanahan.
Well, if you want to act like a business, you should look like a business. Collectives and cooperatives should be member-owned, member-controlled, and operates not for profit, but rather for the mutual benefit of its members. We would expect that these individuals and these people operating as a collective possess all the appropriate documentation and appear to be operating not for profit. We would expect that from a legitimate business, and if you're going to operate as such, we would expect you to have the same sort of documentation.
I actually tried to catch up on some case law last night, and I have to be perfectly honest with you, I am not totally up to date on the state of the law. The thing about marijuana in California is it's so vague with regard to what is permitted and what is not permitted under the law. And I think that everybody in this room would agree that the lack of clarity is causing consternation on all parts. It's important for us to look at the case law that's coming down, recent case law that talks about having and dispensing marijuana for profit as opposed to reimbursing yourself for reasonable expenses that you incur. Talks about cooperatives and collectives, whether or not you have to actually participate in the cultivation of the marijuana as opposed to participating in another way. There are a lot of different variables to consider as you go through how the cases are interpreting what a collective and a cooperative are. Some of them might require bylaws, others might require tax returns. So I think you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, looking what the state of the law is at this point as it applies to collectives and cooperatives, and do what you can to come within the law as it appears to be at this time. And hopefully we can find a way to shore up these situations through legislative action. Our Attorney General has chosen to defer to the legislature, as you may recall, when she was called upon to readdress the guidelines that were put in place by her predecessor. So that's kind of where we are with collectives and cooperatives. Thank you.
Thank you both. Part B, do you agree that the Sonoma County guidelines provide a safe harbor from arrest and prosecution so that a collective or a cooperative can cultivate and possess up to 30 plants within 100 square feet, up to 3 pounds per patient, and are not subject to criminal penalties? Ms. Ravich?
Yeah, I do. I think it's an extension of what we talked about earlier with regard to the ordinance and the 3-pound, 30-plant, 100-foot canopy that is under the ordinance and that has been adopted through the chief's protocol and is being imposed, or I should say is being respected by law enforcement agencies and by my office. So yeah, it would extend to collectives and cooperatives.
And I would agree. Further elaborating on my previous answer, again, showing sufficient organizational structure that can assure that there's non-diversion of funds, that there's compliance with state and local laws, that it's has business license, seller's permits, sales, they're paying their sales taxes. They have proper documentation like any business. Membership applications and verification, and that marijuana is being provided to members only. They only distribute to their members and only sell to their members. Again, it's about operating a legitimate business that looks like a legitimate business, and if reviewed, it appears to be a legitimate business. And obviously, if they're operating within the guidelines, they would not be subject to prosecution under my administration.
Thank you. This question I find a little bit open-ended, but I'm sure both of you have the experience to fill it in. Can members of a collective or cooperative exchange finances lawfully, and what is considered reasonable compensation? Ms. Shanahan?
Yes, I believe that they can do that in instances where there's a transfer from a designated caregiver to that caregiver's qualified patient for such consideration is sufficient to reimburse that caregiver for their expenses and services, as well in instances where there's transfers between qualified members who must be either patients or caregivers, facilitated through an association of patients and caregivers as a nonprofit, cooperative, or collective. In those two instances, I believe that collectives or cooperatives can exchange finances.
As long as it's not for profit. When you start getting into for profit, then you're not dealing with collectives and cooperatives anymore. Otherwise, the case law does permit for reasonable compensation within the collective or cooperative situation.
Thank you. That whole area of collectives and cooperatives, in my mind, cries out for more paperwork, more knowledge for the community so that we can stay out of trouble. Let's move on to prosecution. And Ms. Ravich, you will be first. Both of our candidates are working in an office with no decrease in cannabis prosecution rates. A, what protocols will you give your administration as to selecting and prosecuting medical marijuana cases?
Well, you know, I read that and I saw no decrease in cannabis prosecution rates. And I don't know if that's true. And I know that I'm going to get dinged tonight, and I get dinged every time I say it because we don't have a very good means of statistically interpreting what's happening in our office right now. I've been able to get funds for a case management system, and I hope to be able to report out better once it goes into effect in January. But at this time, it's really hard to track it. If you go and look at the number of cases filed, they're lumped in with cases that go to our 1210 court, which are straight possession cases. And there's no way to really distinguish between cases that might involve cooperatives, collectives, or individuals who are potentially legitimate patients who have been charged improperly. So I don't know about that allegation of no decrease in cannabis prosecution rates. With regard to the protocols, again, I have laid out my policy, which is that this is a low-level priority in my office. What we're focusing on is the cultivation and sale of marijuana that is associated with trafficking, with particularly interstate trafficking, and with violence. And I just can't make it clear to you or to the community at large that if it appears that we are prosecuting legitimate patients, you bring it to our attention. I have never turned away anybody who's wanted to talk to me about a case, and I've taken a look at it and I've made a decision that I thought was appropriate under the circumstances. With regard to protocols, I've been talking with some of the advocates that are in this room and other advocates about a written protocol. The problem with a written protocol is that these cases are all different. And if you try and have a written protocol that has rigid parameters, I think that you're doing a disservice to the review of these cases. I have reviewed the protocol that came out of Santa Clara. I'm watching the wrong timekeeper, I apologize. I have looked at the protocol that came out of Santa Clara, and I talked to the DA down there. That was a protocol written for dispensaries as opposed to cooperatives and collectives. I'm working with others to reformat it so that it better addresses issues that are important here in Sonoma County. I have a copy of it here with me. We've had one meeting on this already, and I guess you could call us a study group, and we're due to meet again. I think it's on May 11th or May 12th or somewhere in early May to discuss it again to see if we can come up with some sort of written parameters so that we can all better understand what the laws do provide for. But again, I caution you, written protocols, if you get too specific, you're going to run into the same problem that you do when you say we don't have any protocols at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Shanahan?
Well, from my vantage point as a deputy DA, marijuana does not appear to be a low priority in Sonoma County. Felony trial departments, nearly half the cases are marijuana. I see them every day. I see multiple defendant cases. You need protocols. You need standards set. You need a policy. That's where you get consistency. You get together with the stakeholders, law enforcement, cannabis advocates, and sit down and develop a policy that works within the Sonoma County guidelines so that at least we have a place to start and we can advise the deputy DAs within the office, these cases will file, these cases will pursue. You need to have guidelines. Obviously, you take a case-by-case basis and you analyze the case accordingly, but you use your standards to guide yourself. Every DA's office does that. So protocols are extremely important. I think that you need to set something in place where you have clear guidelines. In instances where someone's in compliance with the Sonoma County guidelines, we will not prosecute. We will not waste our resources on those cases. On cases where someone might be able to show they could get into compliance, allow remediation so that they can do that before prosecuting, thereby saving up resources and focusing them on the areas we need to be focusing on, which is the huge drug trafficking cases that do occur and the violence that can be associated. Then the resources are going to the area that need to be focused, not on the lower level marijuana cases. That's what a DA's office can do. That's what a DA's office should do. Provides consistency not only for law enforcement but the community.
Thank you. B, how will you ensure that law enforcement agencies and officers will be consistent with your administration's guidelines? Ms. Shanahan?
I have a somewhat of a hillbilly saying, the buck stops with the DA's office. We set the tone for the rest of the county. Law enforcement can investigate their cases, but if the DA's office doesn't file them, nothing happens. So we can set the tone. We can let law enforcement know. You bring us cases where someone's in compliance with the Sonoma County guidelines, this DA's office will not file. And they'll stop bringing us those cases and focus their resources on more important crimes, such as the violence associated with home invasion robberies and murder, and things that are concerning to public safety. Absolutely. The buck stops with us. We stop filing on low-level marijuana cases, people in compliance with the guidelines and setting a policy, we won't be getting any more filings from law enforcement in that regard, and they will focus their resources. The DA can take the leadership role in this community. We control what cases are filed.
Ms. Ravich?
I had a conversation with the police chief, and I explained to him that I was going to honor the Sonoma County guidelines since the Board of Supervisors had decided not to repeal it. He said, well, you can do whatever you want, but we're going to keep doing whatever we think is right within the law. So respectfully, I disagree with some assertion that we can somehow tell the police or the sheriff what they can and cannot do. What we can do is decide whether or not to file cases that we do believe comply with the local ordinance, and that's what we're doing right now. If there are cases out there that are within the guidelines or that involve legitimate patients that are in our criminal justice system, then bring them to my attention and we'll take a look at them. I have stepped forward. I have led. Go and talk to the prosecutors who are assigned in the unit, who have been in charge of weeding through, no pun intended, those cases to see which cases they should and should not file. And they're going to tell you there are so many cases that we reject because these are legitimate patients or they're legitimate collectives, and we're only filing the ones that are very, very clear, involving either people that are using the medical marijuana laws for profit or engaged in violence. They're handling cases that involve trafficking across the country. They're handling cases that are involving incredible violence. We're looking at environmental degradation. These are the cases that we're focusing on. And to suggest that they're clogging up the criminal courts, we've actually reduced the number of lawyers that are assigned to narcotics cases. It was brought up last week that I've increased the number of narcotics deputies. Actually, there used to be one narcotics deputy assigned to each felony courtroom. And there was one who was the lead narcotics deputy for purposes of search warrant review. Well, we've got two, and I checked with them just today, and they said that yes, they are doing a number of number of marijuana cases, and that includes money laundering and trafficking and violence. But they're also doing a lot of heroin cases, a lot of methamphetamine cases, and other substances that are being abused and trafficked in Sonoma County. So it's not as if we're focusing our effort on medical marijuana patients. I really, it's a very murky area. Are we ever going to get it right? I don't know. Are we going to legalize marijuana? Probably. I don't expect that in the next election cycle we're even going to be here having this conversation, because I do expect that it will be legalized here in California, if not in other states.
Will you support that?
Pardon me?
Will you support
I'm not going
that?
to...
Let us know what we're supporting before we ask what we're supporting. I think we'll just have two more questions, folks. You're being very patient. So I'm not going to open it up to the audience. Did you finish?
Yes.
My apologies, sir. Return of property. It is rare that the DA's office dismisses charges without requiring a guilty plea settlement. When a patient settles their case through plea, they often do not request return of their medicine because of fear of federal prosecution, etc. The question, what guidelines would you give your administration to discourage any threat of federal prosecution for medical cannabis patients? Ms. Shanahan, I think. Yes.
Well,
Lost my place.
what a district attorney can do is not, report those types of cases to the federal government and have them focus on these individuals. We can't control the federal government. They're going to do what they're going to do, but we don't have to assist them. And I believe the Attorney General guidelines stated in case law supports that state and local government, law enforcement, are not required to enforce federal law. So we won't be making any extra effort to report people to the federal government about their marijuana.
Thank you. Ms. Ravich.
Yeah, I mean, it's a separate issue with regard to what the feds decide to do regarding the prosecution of cannabis patients. There's nothing that we can do about it, although I have talked with the U.S. Attorney on more than one occasion about the policies that are in place at the federal level, where their priorities are. And I think, as you know, that they've been advised by Attorney General Holder with regard to what types of marijuana cases they're going to prosecute. And I think he issued a policy statement, I want to say last year. It might have been this year, but I think it was last year, so that we can have a better understanding of where the feds are in that area. But we can't, other than having the conversation with them and discussing anecdotally what's happening in our jurisdiction, we can't influence how the feds are going to be addressing cannabis cases.
Thank you. As future district attorney, would you consider an office policy to return medicine or personal property on settled cases? Ms. Ravich?
Yeah, well, as current district attorney, I have considered all of this, and it's something that was addressed also when I was up in Mendocino. I had the pleasure of serving in Mendocino prior to becoming district attorney. The thing that we have to keep in mind is we are not the seizing agency, and we are not the storing agency. And for those of you who have sought return of property, you've come to court and you've dealt with whoever the seizing agency was, and generally it was probably the Sheriff's Department, represented by County Council. So we're not a party to that process, so to speak. In the case where a case is not filed, certainly we can weigh in on whether or not property should be returned or should be considered contraband. But with regard to a case that's gone through the system and resolved out in whatever way it is, that's just not something that we have any control over.
Thank you.
Well, hopefully if I'm elected and we can develop some guidelines, this issue will become moot because we won't be filing on medical cases where they have legitimate need. Courts can return marijuana, as Ms. Ravich stated, but the DA can have an active role in agreeing to that return and not objecting. Right now we object to everything. So we can change the mentality and definitely make it easier. But again, if you have guidelines, there'll be less and less medical marijuana seized.
Thank you. I have one question left for those of you who are being patient and have questions. The 3x5 cards, Mary Pat, would you hold them up or over there? And if you want one, now's the time. She's going to order those up so we don't have redundancies, and otherwise I can read them. So moving to our last question before we get to those questions. Most medical cannabis dispensaries are operating within city-county regulations with few complaints. The question, first to Ms. Ravich, are you willing to affirm the legality of medical cannabis dispensaries licensed by local governments in Sonoma County?
And I'm looking at it again, and when I read it, I looked at it again. So I think what it's saying is that the dispensaries that are operating within city-county regulations. And so if they're operating within city and county regulations, they shouldn't even be becoming within my purview. And I'm not aware of any that are coming within my purview because they're operating within city and county regulations. I think that those that have fallen out of compliance are usually handled through regulatory enforcement, which is entirely appropriate since they are permitted enterprises as opposed to criminal enforcement. I think that may have happened at some point with regard to some dispensaries before the county increased the number of permits that it was offering. I think we're up to 9 permits in Sonoma County. I don't know if all those permits are currently in effect, but it's really an area where regulatory enforcement is used because of the nature of the permitting that is permitted for these dispensaries.
Thank you. Shanahan?
Yes, they'd still be allowed to operate. Obviously, they're operating legitimately and properly. They should have no issue with the district attorney's office or law enforcement. Again, it's about transparency, maintaining legitimate business, non-profit, closed loop. You won't have any problems.
This last question is somewhat redundant. Do you have a suggestion for those facilities to continue to operate complaint-free? Perhaps, well, I don't know, it's the question. Ms. Shanahan?
Reiterating what I've said previously, if you're operating properly, you're not going to have any issues with the district attorney's office. Even if law enforcement has an issue with you, as long as you have proper records, you'll be fine. Continue to operate legitimately, and everything should be okay.
I agree with everything she just said.
Good. And that is why I'm off to the side. So, are we okay out there? I have about 10 questions, and we'll just kind of go rapid fire. Oh, she said if you can't read them, I'm here.
Wait, before you start,
Yes.
Was there something else that you were going to do with the audience?
Oh, that's right. You know, thanks a lot. I was given some questions here. And this is like audience participation, so let's do this just to see how we stack up. Raise your hand if someone you know or love has been prosecuted for medical cannabis in Sonoma County. Okay. Keep your hand up if you think those people should not have been prosecuted. Well, even more hands went up. If you're a member of a collective that has been prosecuted, please raise your hand. Raise your hand if you've been prosecuted for medical cannabis. Keep your hand up if you took a deal despite feeling you were innocent. Raise your hand if you think we are wasting resources in court on cannabis. No, well, I can raise my hand now. There we go, we got this all. Thank you, Kumari. My apologies. Okay. First question, probably won't take too long on these. What's our 2 minutes each? Question 1. Why is it that the previous DA was able to produce statistics, yet in 4 years you have not been able to produce statistics showing conviction rates? I presume that's for Ms. Ravich, so you might as well go first.
Yeah, I'm not aware of the previous DA being able to show conviction rates. Actually, I know that towards the end of the campaign he came up with conviction rates regarding jury trials through a hand count of some nature, but I'm not aware of him being able to come up with conviction rates. I can tell you that I check with, we have an analyst now, and he goes through our IJS system all the time, and I try to get information from him, and when he gives me what he culls through and produces, to me it's inaccurate, and I don't understand it. And so because of that, I went to the Board of Supervisors and I said, we need to have a case management system. And the Board of Supervisors agreed, and they gave us $2 million. And we're going to go out, and we've got an RFP in place, and we're in the process of installing a case management system so that effective in January, we'll be able not only to measure outcomes, but performance by our deputy DAs too on each of these cases. The public defender is also a beneficiary of this case management system. It'll interface with the courts and hopefully with the law enforcement agencies so that we can have better accountability here in Sonoma County.
Thank you. Ms. Shanahan, your response on producing statistics.
Well, under the prior administration, we actually got statistics pretty regularly and presented to our group of attorneys in the office. They're the best way to gauge how we're doing, what areas need more focus, such as a caseload has gone up, our filing rates are higher in a certain area, so therefore we need more resources put into that area. So they're very important to gauge how we're doing and what we can do better. We can capture marijuana cases and figure out what ones were filed and what ones weren't, how many were felonies, how many were misdemeanors. It used to be done by a part-time individual whose collateral duty was to bring out these statistics. Now we have a full-time individual whose sole job is to qualify and quantify statistics. It can be done.
Thank you. The cards are rolling in. Do you personally support or oppose the Sheriff Department's 250% increase in marijuana-related arrests between 2006 and 2012, reported in Board of Supervisors package of December 2012? Do you believe it is worth the millions of dollars it cost our county and law enforcement, etc., incarceration, defense costs, prosecution? Shanahan, do you personally support or oppose the Sheriff's Department's 250% increase in marijuana-related arrests?
Well, not having been in the filing part of marijuana cases, what I get to see is, hundreds of cases being filed in our office and watching the individuals come to court and watching how those cases are being handled and then the ultimate outcomes in some of those matters. And it does seem like an inordinate amount of resources are wasted on cases that basically are filed as felonies with multiple defendants and ultimately get reduced to misdemeanors or a diversion type plea and dismissed. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars wasted on those cases when, if we had guidelines, we could hit it head on and make decisions before even filing, therefore saving money for the county.
Well, I don't really think that answered the question, but And this hundreds of thousands of dollars allegation, I don't really understand either. I don't understand the correlation between guidelines and filing and saving money. I will tell you that I set the policy. I'm very concerned at all the hands that just went up in the room, and so I would like to know what your story is, because clearly the policy that I've set isn't being followed. If every hand raised in this room is indeed a legitimate patient who has been prosecuted in this county under my tenure. So I'd like to know that information. But I will tell you also that there are marijuana cases that are legitimately filed. There are people that are using the laws that protect your rights illegally, and those are the people, hopefully, that we're focusing our prosecution efforts on. And just because I'm not out of time, I don't think, she hasn't held up it yet, I want to just go back on the analyst. This analyst, he doesn't just sit there and open files and count them the way the part-time person did before. We have more cases coming through the office, and this analyst's job is actually mostly to go out and apply for, secure, and administer grants to make up for the incredible loss of staff that I've suffered since I took office. Keep in mind, budget cuts reduced the staff in my office. We had to reallocate resources. Ultimately, I was able to find funding for an analyst. As a result, he's been able to secure and administer over $1 million in grant funding from exterior sources that have enabled us to bring in people like vertical prosecutors for DUI prosecution. Things of that nature that we wouldn't ordinarily be able to do. He doesn't just sit there and count beans. Thank you.
Next question, kind of two-part, one for Victoria, one for Jill. For Victoria, first, thank you for your service. How will your administration be different than Jill's current leadership? For Jill, thank you for your service. How will your administration be an advantage for Sonoma County, specifically if you are re-elected? And I've lost my place. Who went first last time?
She can go again.
Oh. Okay, Ms. Ravich.
Okay. Well, thank you for thanking me for my service. It's a tough job, I have to tell you, and I think that, I guess the question is that the question? Oh, that's the question. Okay, thank you for your service. How will your administration be an advantage for Sonoma County, specifically if you're re-elected? I think I've done a good job. I understand what the issue is for this group, the primary issue, but I ask you to step away from the primary issue that brings you in here tonight and take a look at public safety and take a look at what I've done for Sonoma County. And I guess I'll save most of that for my closing remarks to you. But I do think that my experience, my time in the courtroom, as well as now my time in the district attorney's office as the lead of an office of 120 staff members with a $22 million budget, has really helped me, I believe, define how we can best serve our community. And I think we've had a lot of success under my tenure, and I think it's success that we can continue to see going forward if I am honored to be re-elected as your district attorney. Thank you.
Well, I'll be different in the way you'll know where I'm coming from. I'll have policies in place. You'll know the direction of the office. Marijuana will actually be a low priority, and that serious and violent crime will be the priority. I will be a decisive leader. You will know my position on the various issues that affect this community. I won't hide from that. You will be very clear about where I stand on different issues. I'll be transparent, and I'll make reforms within the office that were promised but were never achieved under this current administration. I'm bringing leadership back into the DA's office. That is my hope. Thank you.
Thank you. This question. And by the way, as to the questions, I cannot vouch for the veracity of them, but we're going to go through them regardless. Most plea agreements include restrictions on medical cannabis patients to 2 ounces or less of possession of medicine, no opportunity to cultivate. Why are patients required to purchase, not cultivate their medicine? Ms. Shanahan?
I'm not really sure why we're doing that. Again, a policy would be helpful in our office. It would give guidance to our district attorneys who are prosecuting these cases. I'm not sure why we're doing that. You might need to ask Ms. Ravich that specific question. It just seems really all over the map on how we're handling cases, and I can't make sense of it. Thank you.
Ms. Ravich, most plea agreements indicate restrictions on medical cannabis to 2 ounces, and patients can't grow their own.
I'm not aware that patients can't cultivate their own medicine, so I can't really speak to that. I think what they're looking for in the plea agreements is some sort of, and I'm not sure which cases are resulting in 2 ounces or less of possession of medicine either. So it's kind of hard to respond to something in a vacuum. Again, whoever wrote this, if you want to talk to me and have me take a look at what's going on with your case or with the case that you're concerned about, I'm happy to do that. The district attorney's office takes a look at each case individually. It's important to have general policies in place, which is what we have endeavored to do so that there can be consistency in how we handle the prosecution of marijuana cases and other cases. That's why they're handled vertically, which means the same deputies review the police reports and take them all the way through completion to the extent that they're able to, given the volume of cases. Every case stands on its own. If somebody comes in and says, I'm a patient, here's my recommendation, here's my situation, we take a look at that. That's very different than somebody who's a trafficker or somebody who's engaged in some other nefarious activity that is not allowed under the law. Each of our prosecutors is charged with knowing the law, and they've given me really great outlines of cases that they're keeping up on, and they provide this information to other line staff like Ms. Shanahan so that they can be well versed in the law. But I ask you, let's remember, the law changes all the time. You can be prosecuting a case one day, same set of facts, a month later, a case has come down that changes the law here in California. That's how in flux and that's how vague things are ever since 215.
Thank you. You answered that question?
I did.
Oh, sorry. I'm losing my place here because I have so many questions and so little time. Timekeepers. Candidates, can we go to 1 minute on the answers now? 1 minute. Many Moreland Avenue residents were raided by a cooperative of federal agencies, state agencies, with the help and assistance of local law enforcement, many of whom were in possession of the proper permits. Is this something that you approved of, Ms. Ravich? If so, why? And Ms. Shanahan, what would your position be with respect to cooperating with the feds in these types of raids in the future? I believe you're up, Ms. Ravich.
Yeah, I think it was, the question was, did I approve of it? No, I didn't approve of it. This was a law enforcement endeavor, and I don't want to speak to it any further because I don't know what the status is of any cases that may have come out of this particular endeavor. But the police are different than the district attorney's office. The police go out and do what they do. We hope that they communicate with us to some extent to understand what the parameters are of cases that we will file, but we don't get to tell them who they can go out and investigate and who they can go out and arrest. They will come to us for the purpose of getting search warrants approved, but with regard to putting together some sort of enforcement effort, that's within the purview of these agencies. And so you'd have to go back and take a look at who was running the operation and have this conversation with them.
But you have a right to speak out about it publicly from your position.
Wish you would.
Yes, and your response, you might pass that card over.
I did.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm not familiar with what information law enforcement had. Ms. Ravich does speak to law enforcement can do what they do and investigate the cases. Then it comes to the DA's office. So it sounds like we filed on everyone in that investigation. Again, if we had guidelines, we had policies in place, we would know whether or not we file on an individual, if they were in compliance with the guidelines or not, and we wouldn't file even if law enforcement brought the cases to us. So without knowing the facts of each and every one of those cases, and not sure if they're pending as well, you know, again, guidelines would help, policies would help, consistency would be the result.
Thank you. This should be quick. Do small growing collectives of less than 15 or 20 patients need to pay taxes and obtain county permits, Ms. Shanahan?
Well, I think if you're going to operate as a collective and you're going to expect reimbursement for your services, I think you should be operating as a business and be transparent. If you don't want law enforcement sniffing at your door, have all the proper documentation. The DA's office has our policy in place. We don't prosecute individuals who are operating legitimately. Again, it's a closed loop situation, it's a not-for-profit situation, and your records need to show that.
So, do small growing collectives need
Yeah,
permits?
again, I think when you take a look at what a collective is, it's a group of individuals that come together to cultivate and use medical cannabis for medicinal purposes. So the question is whether or not that definition is met. And I think you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. But I'm not aware of the county permitting for the smaller collectives.
Thank you. Ms. Ravich, please respond. I'm an attorney, a Sonoma County narcotics officer told my paralegal, we spend so much time on pot, we can't follow up on meth leads. Both candidates?
Really? Wow. Who's first?
I think you're...
Okay. My response is I'm really concerned about that. I'm just looking at I'm trying to read whoever wrote this. They should have been a doctor instead. Narcotics officer told my paralegal, we spend so much time on pot, we can't follow up on meth leads. I think this is something, depending upon what agency this narcotics officer works with, this should come to the attention of their supervisor, because obviously methamphetamine is a very, very dangerous drug, and I can't speak to the policies of either the Sheriff's Office or the Santa Rosa Police Department. Those are the two departments that have narcotics task forces, or to the other agencies for that matter, if this is a narcotics officer from a different agency.
Obviously, meth is a very serious problem in this community. Illicit drugs such as meth and heroin, it's a problem. Again, law enforcement speaking, I've heard the same sentiments. Lots of cases being handled, lots of cases being pushed through the court system, taking years for prosecution. Officers having to show up. They can't focus their resources on more important crimes such as meth abatement and heroin and other serious and violent crime. And I think law enforcement would benefit from the district attorney's office taking a leadership role within this community and saying, the buck stops here with us. We won't be filing on these types of cases. Focus your investigations on other more important cases.
With respect to Sonoma County guidelines, when a marijuana trial involves marijuana, will you agree to let the guidelines go into evidence and be considered by a jury if the judge allows? Ms. Shanahan?
Well, there's all kinds of evidentiary issues there. I'm not really sure how to answer that because, you know, if we stipulate that there's Sonoma County guidelines, I would be happy to stipulate there's Sonoma County guidelines. But again, I go back and I'm sounding like a broken record. If we had a policy and a position on marijuana, we wouldn't need to be showing evidence of policies and guidelines in Sonoma County because we wouldn't be prosecuting those individuals. Thank you.
Well, but the thing is I'm saying I'm respecting the ordinance, and I have been respecting the ordinance in effect. So the fact that somebody wants to enter the guidelines into evidence, it depends on what the charges are and what the applicability of the particular guidelines is to whatever the offense is. I mean, it's kind of asked in a vacuum, but I've made very clear that we are not prosecuting legitimate patients. We are, at least we're not supposed to be, and that we're not going to prosecute people that come within the Sonoma County guidelines. And you know, this resource issue, I'm sorry, I got to go back to this last question. This whole idea if we had better policies, then the police would know what we were and we were not doing. Well, we do have policies in effect, and we're not filing a number of cases, the majority of these cases that are coming in, so the police are well aware of what we are doing and not doing, and I've had the conversations with law enforcement leaders. Again, that isn't going to change what the priorities are in their departments. That's up to them.
Will you continue to prosecute drivers who come through Sonoma County to deliver medical marijuana to collectives and dispensaries in the Bay Area or Southern California? I believe you're up first, Ms. Ravich.
I think there was a case that just came down that said I can't. And I couldn't quote it to you if my life depended on it, but I know that there is case law that permits transportation of medicine to collectives. So I will certainly follow the law.
Ms. Shanahan?
I echo those sentiments. Again, it's about showing what you're doing, being transparent, transporting for a collective. Here's the collective, verifying that that's what's going on, and they will be left alone.
Okay. Some of these are, okay, I don't know. how to answer this, but you're going to try. During recent raids, the very first question law enforcement asks is, where do you keep your money? Why is this question asked?
What is the question?
Where do you keep your money?
Where do I keep my money? I don't have any.
Well, I guess the law enforcement's asking people who get raided, where do you keep your money? And the question is, why are they doing that?
Well, because some people operate outside the guidelines and perhaps are operating for profit, and law enforcement's going to be asking for the money. There are forfeiture laws on the books where law enforcement can seize money that's illicitly gained through drug sales. So that's why they're doing it.
I know that the Sheriff's Office, I'm not sure if the Santa Rosa Police Department have a specific script that they adhere to if they encounter people that are telling them that they have a collective cooperative or that they are a legitimate patient. And I don't know if that's the first question on the script that they adhere to, but in all likelihood, they are looking to see if there is evidence of money that would be suggestive of cultivating for profit as opposed to cultivating for legitimate use by patients. These are questions really you should be asking the law enforcement agency.
I think it occurs to me that a lot of folks perhaps get the district attorney's office and the sheriff's department confused in terms of their roles, and it's something we all need to work on. This question, Ms. Ravich, is a follow-up. Your challenger said regarding return of property, the DA currently objects in court. Please respond. Is this a policy or?
I'm not aware that the DA always objects. I'm aware that the motion for return of property is filed and that the seizing agency is the responding party and that we're not a party to that discussion. And my understanding is the county council comes in and represents the sheriff and that the police agencies are represented by, I think it's the city attorney. So I'm not aware of that being policy.
Shanahan?
Well, you talk to the judges and the DAs are objecting. Whether we have grounds to object or not, we're making it clear that we're not agreeing to any return of property if it involves marijuana, regardless of medical or not. So we are objecting, and county council comes in, and if it's the sheriff's office, they come in, and then the Santa Rosa Police Department, if it was seized through them, their respective attorney comes in. But our position is we're not returning it. Thank you.
Seems like that needs a follow-up, but I'm just going to let it go. With medical marijuana, what percentage of money is confiscated by the sheriff goes to the district attorney, Ms. Shanahan?
I'm not sure. You would have to ask Ms. Ravich about that.
Ms. Ravich, what percentage of money confiscated by the sheriff goes to the DA?
Well, I don't know, because it's kind of a hard question because it begins with medical marijuana. And then it says what percentage of money is confiscated. I'm not sure about confiscation of monies. If the questioner is asking about asset forfeiture, there is a percentage of assets that are forfeited that will go to the district attorney's office. Honestly, I don't know what the percentage is. We have somebody in our office who's been working on the asset forfeiture cases for a long time, and if the questioner wants to know specifically what the breakdown is, I'm happy to provide it. With a federal seizure, the monies that are confiscated through seizure, through asset forfeiture, there's a different disbursement of funds.
I'm going to restate this question. It says, will you support a state law that regulates and licenses medical cannabis? I think I'd like you to respond, what's missing in terms of regulating and licensing medical cannabis? What would make it easier? And I think you're first again.
Okay. What would make it easier would be clear rules. The earlier questions that were posed to us had to do with some bills that are pending in the legislature. It'd be really nice if the legislature would figure out exactly how it is that they want to license dispensaries and things of that nature and the regulation that they want to have. There's one bill that talks about putting it under, I think it's under ABC, and there's another bill that talks about putting it under public health, if I'm remembering correctly. I apologize if I don't have my details accurate. But I do think that we need to have some sort of regulatory scheme that goes from border to border in the state of California so we can all understand exactly what the rules are. I mean, I apologize if I don't appear to be well versed in the details involving medical marijuana and involving regulatory schemes, but I think that one thing I can be clear about is that we do need to have something that we can all understand, because I think everybody in this room wants to make sure that we understand the law so that we can follow it, so that we can ensure safe access to medical cannabis, and I share that hope.
It would be nice if we could get some good direction from Sacramento on how to best deal with this issue. I think we can start locally by having law enforcement agencies such as the district attorney's office making it very clear about how they're proceeding in certain instances with individuals, with collectives or cooperatives. And it can trickle from there. If we all stand firm, Sacramento will be forced to start giving us some direction in this area. We need it. You know, it's kind of surprising that California is behind Colorado and Washington as far as taking care of basically legalizing marijuana. You know, California's always been known for being at the forefront of kind of forward thinking. So I think it would be helpful if Sacramento would step in and provide us with some information and guidelines.
Thank you. We're getting pretty close. What is your position on commercial growing for and by legal dispensaries, locally permitted zone? That is, can dispensaries grow their own? What is your position on that, Ms. Shanahan?
I wouldn't have a problem with it. Again, it's about transparency and record keeping and operating your business like a legitimate business. As long as those, that information and that documentation and all that is in place, I don't have a problem with it. I think what you're going to get into is where do those individuals set up business, and that's something you can work with the district attorney's office and local leaders and community leaders in dealing with ordinances and where best to put places such as that would grow marijuana. We don't want it near schools and have drug endangered children type situations. We don't want it, you know, residential neighborhoods. So it's something that a district attorney's office can sit down and collaborate with other leaders in developing the best way to implement something like that.
Ravich.
Well, it kind of goes to what I said about regulatory schemes. I mean, when you get into issues about commercial growing and permitting and issues like that, you have to bring in local and county government to have that conversation. I remember when I ran before, wondering, well, okay, here are these dispensaries that are dispensing medicine, but where did it come from? And what happens when the door opens and the medicine arrives? Where did it come from? And are the people who are growing the medicine that's now being dispensed, are they growing it legally or illegally? And if you're a legitimate dispensary that is dispensing medicine, do you have to break the law to get the medicine to dispense? And so I understand the interest in having a closed loop system, because I think in that way it also decreases the incidence of violence or the threat of violence. So I think it's a conversation, and it's a conversation I've had for the last few years with different entities in Sonoma County and throughout the state, and I think it's a conversation that we should continue. It's something obviously that's been very visible down in Alameda County, and it's something that has also been very visible in case law that's come out of Southern California. So if we can find a way to cultivate and provide medical cannabis in a safer fashion, it's a win-win all the way around. It's going to take regulation, it's going to take buy-in from a number of different entities, but let's just have the conversation. Let's figure it out.
I have three questions here that have sort of been talked about and are kind of in the same vein. I'm going to change it into one question. How do you regard or justify asset seizure for assets for non-associated businesses to cooperatives and collectives, landlords, for example? Do you condone the county profiting? There are many people currently in the court system with legitimate proposed papered gardens that complied with county regulations. These people have had their gardens destroyed, property seized, and face felony charges. What do you intend to do with these current and future cases? Many collective members have ended up in court for years to settle for misdemeanor agreements. This is a good use of our resource. It seems like we do not have a handle on the collective and cooperative from the standpoint of medical patients, and I've heard both of you. What more can you give us in terms of what medical marijuana collectives and might do to stay out of trouble with the district attorney's office? I believe you're up next.
Me? Okay. Well, let's keep talking about it. Remember, I'm not a police agency. I'm not the one who's out inspecting these collectives and cooperatives and deciding whether or not to write paper, pull plans, arrest individuals, seize assets. That's the sheriff's office, that's the local law enforcement agencies, and you should be having conversations with them. And I know that you do, because I've participated in conversations with some of the advocacy groups over the years. It was really back with Sheriff Cogbill when I got involved in those conversations. At the district attorney's office, again, I am working with some of you in the room and others to see if we can adopt some sort of a written protocol that better addresses what is acceptable under this current state of the law with regard to collectives, cooperatives, and individual patient rights. We're working on it, but again, we are hamstrung by vague laws, by a failure on the part of the legislature to act in a uniform fashion so that we can really understand what the rules are, and then by spotty interpretation of these vague laws by different courts throughout our state. Depending upon where you are in California, you're going to get a different outcome on the same set of facts. And a case may be published, and all of a sudden it gets applied in a different jurisdiction where it really doesn't seem to make sense for the type of population that it's addressing. So I keep coming back to, it needs to be done on a much bigger playing field than the one that is in my office, certainly, and the one that is in Sonoma County, for that matter, as well.
Ms. Shanahan?
Well, again, I think we can look to the Attorney General's guidelines that lays out cooperatives and collectives and what you can do to stay out of trouble, if you will. And I've been saying it over and over again. Run your business like a legitimate business. Have the proper documentation. Conform your behavior like you're a nonprofit, closed loop. Have verification of your members. That, if you operate within the Attorney General guidelines, that could provide a basis for the District Attorney's Office to set their policy in this county on that issue. It seems pretty straightforward. It seems like it's the guidelines conform with the current state of the law, and I think we have to work with what we have. And obviously we can adjust our position as the laws may change, though they're not deviating that much, really. It's really about the policies of the DA's office and what cases we should be filing and focusing on and what cases we shouldn't.
Thank you. We are coming up to closing statements. I have a couple of questions left. Ms. Shanahan will go first on a 4-minute closing statement, and then Ms. Ravich. I will not speak to you after that, but I appreciate the questions, the attentiveness of the audience, and I do believe we have benefited greatly from this exchange, and oh, if it were all only true. If marijuana is legalized in November, will the DA's office revisit all cases being prosecuted? I assume the answer to that is yes. Somebody wants to know about your conversation with the Attorney General, please ask after. And the last question that I'm going to ask before we go to closing statements is rhetorical, but it's for Ms. Ravich. From what you have stated today, no small grower will be prosecuted if there is no violence, no drugs, no weapons. Will my case be dismissed tomorrow?
I'm serious.
It may not be humorous to you, but it does give us a little levity because it's always serious when you're involved in the court system. At this point, again, I would like to thank the candidates. They've done a terrific job. All of our sponsors. It's been my pleasure to only get lost a couple of times up here, but to moderate this. And now for a closing statement, Victoria Shanahan.
Thank you. Thank you for taking your time out, your evening, to listen to the candidates tonight. I appreciate it. I find myself in a very awkward situation running against my current boss. I felt it needed to be done. I felt leadership was lacking in our office, and one of the main areas is the failure of cohesive and collaborative marijuana policy to help guide our office into the next phase. Legalization is on its way. I'm hoping the feds hurry up and do it, but until they do, California and District Attorney's Office can set up their own protocol and follow their own guidelines within their community. The buck stops with our office. We can set the tone. There needs to be leadership in the DA's office. There needs to be transparency. You need to know where we stand on important issues such as medical marijuana. You need to know that our office is going to be dedicated to public safety and concerns for the community and serious and violent crime, and that we're not going to be spending taxpayer money on cases that don't need to be prosecuted. And if we could just set the tone for our office and make that change, we can make a difference in Sonoma County. And we can take a leadership role. We can become from a reactive office who's playing catch up on a daily basis to a proactive office and being wise and smart on crime and think about what we're doing and why we're doing it. I'm that leader. I'm not a politician. I don't make a career out of running for office. I frankly don't like this process. I feel that I am the person that this district attorney's office needs, that I have the community's best interests at heart, and that I can do a good job in setting standards for this community. Thank you.
Ms. Ravich?
I want to thank our hosts for putting together this forum, and certainly Ernie, thank you for doing such a fine job there, keeping us on time. And you know, it's hard to be district attorney. It really is, and it's a job that I sought out and I was honored to get, and I hope to continue to serve in this capacity. I ask that you go outside of the issues that are important to you here tonight and take a look at all the other things that I do as district attorney in our community. And when you think about leadership, take a look at the places where I have led our office, not only in the area of marijuana and medical marijuana protection, but also in other areas, prosecution of violent offenses, opening of the Family Justice Center, putting together an elder protection unit. There's a lot more to being DA than simply putting out policies with regard to protecting patients' rights with regard to medical marijuana, which is not to say it's not an important part of being DA, but when you look at leadership, take a look at who I am, 27 years as a criminal trial attorney, hundreds of cases in the courtroom, and over a dozen cases, murder cases, including murders that were associated with marijuana, to jury verdict. I've got an extensive history, and if you compare that to my opponent, I think you're going to see that we have very different backgrounds, and that's important for you to take a look at, both with regard to experience in the courtroom and with regard to experience running a $22 million budget with 120 employees. On the area, and also with regard to leadership and the relationships that I've built in the county, the fact that I've been able to work with the Board of Supervisors to get things that will help us better serve you. It's easy to walk in and say, you know what, she's not doing it. I'm going to do it right. Well, okay, where is it? It's easy to criticize. I did it 4 years ago. I criticized, and what have I done since then? I think that I have set the tone in my office with regard to what we're going to prosecute and what we're not going to prosecute. Have I succeeded? Not by the show of hands in here today. Can I do better? Every day. And I say that. And I call upon the people in my office, and I call upon the people in my community to help me do better. And what I'm holding up right here, just so you don't think I'm just blowing smoke, I'm telling you the truth, medical cannabis prosecution protocol. We're working on it. We're working on it. Are we doing it immediately? Should we have done it yesterday? Sure, you'd like it to have been done years ago. But the point is, I'm working on it. And I'm coming to you in all honesty, and there are people in here who I've been working with for years who know I honestly believe in safe access to medical cannabis, and I will do everything to protect your rights in that regard. But I will prosecute people that are trafficking, I will prosecute people that are engaged in violent conduct, and I will prosecute the people that are using medical cannabis protections to profit, to launder money, and to take advantage of our community. That's my job as your district attorney. So let's work together. We're not on opposite sides of the room right now. We actually are all in the same place in our interest in protecting your rights as members of this community and the rights of patients so that they can access their cannabis. So thank you again tonight, and I hope the conversation continues.
I misspoke. Thank you, both candidates. We're so fortunate to have these two women running for office. I would like to thank the Andy Lopez Coalition for respecting this debate and maintaining their vigil outside in a respectful manner. And that concludes our program.
Yay.